The moment my son-in-law handed me that envelope, I knew something was wrong. Not wrong like a bad feeling. Wrong like the ground shifting under your feet and you're the only one who notices. It was a Thursday afternoon in October, the kind of afternoon where the light comes in low through the windows and everything looks golden, almost peaceful. I remember that detail because it felt cruel. How beautiful the house looked right before everything fell apart. My son-in-law, Victor, stood in the doorway of what used to be my living room. He was wearing that gray fleece he always wore on weekends. Arms crossed, not looking at me directly, but not looking away either. That particular kind of eye contact that means someone has rehearsed what they're about to say. "We need to talk about the living situation," he said. I put down my coffee. I had been living with my daughter Elise and Victor for about 14 months at that point. After my wife passed, after Carol died, the house we'd shared for 31 years felt like a museum I was trapped in. Every room had her in it. The kitchen still smelled like the lavender lotion she kept by the sink. I couldn't sleep in our bedroom anymore. I'd been on the couch for 3 months when Elise finally drove up from Raleigh and said, "Dad, you're coming to stay with us." I didn't argue. I was 63 years old, recently retired from 22 years as a high school history teacher, and I was drowning. My daughter threw me a rope. I grabbed it. For the first few months it was good, genuinely good. Elise and I would sit on the back porch after dinner and talk about her childhood, about Carol, about the funny things that only two people who loved the same woman could find funny. Victor was always polite, distant but polite. I told myself that was just his personality. Then the little things started. Victor began mentioning, casually, how tight things were getting financially. He worked in commercial real estate. Not a bad living, but he had expensive taste and a habit of overextending. He mentioned once that the guest room I was staying in could be rented out for $1,200 a month. He said it like a joke. I laughed. He didn't. Elise stopped joining us for those porch conversations. She started working late more often. When I asked if she was okay, she'd smile and say she was just tired. The space between us grew in a way I couldn't measure but could feel every single day. Victor, meanwhile, started being more direct. He mentioned property values. He mentioned long-term plans. He mentioned that his mother had offered to co-sign on a new investment property they were considering, and that having a third adult in the house complicated things with the lender. He was never rude. That was the thing. He was always perfectly reasonable, sentence by sentence, and yet somehow the conclusion of every reasonable sentence was that I needed to go. The envelope came on a Thursday in October. Elise was not in the room. I noticed that. Victor handed it to me himself, standing in the doorway, and he said, "There's something for you in there. We think it'll help with the transition." I looked at the envelope for a moment before I opened it. Inside was a check for $3,000 and a single sticky note in Victor's handwriting. "First and last month at a senior living community. We found one in Durham with availability. Nice place. You'll be comfortable there. $3,000. Carol and I had owned our home in Greensboro outright. We paid off that mortgage 11 years before she passed. When I sold it, when the grief got so bad I couldn't stay anymore, I put the proceeds into a joint account with Elise because she was helping me manage everything, because I trusted her, because she was my daughter and I was not thinking clearly and she was the only person left in my world. That account had $340,000 in it. I stood there holding a check for $3,000, and I thought about that number, and I thought about Carol, and I thought about 31 years of a life that had apparently been reduced to a sticky note about a senior living community in Durham. I set the check down on the counter. "Where is Elise?" I asked. "She's out," Victor said. "She agrees with this, if that's what you're asking." I picked up my coffee cup. I washed it in the sink. I dried it with the dish towel and put it back in the cabinet. I don't know why I did that. Some kind of muscle memory, I think. Keep moving. Keep your hands busy. "I'll need a few days," I said. "Of course," Victor said. "Take the week." I called my old friend Bert that evening from the parking lot of a Walmart 2 miles from the house. I didn't want Victor to hear me. I sat in my car in the dark, and I told Bert everything, and Bert, who had known me since we were both young men coaching Little League in the same county, listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I have always loved about him. When I'd finished, there was a long silence. "The $340,000, Bert said. You still have access to that account? I hadn't checked in months. Elise had been handling it, paying my doctor bills, managing my Medicare supplements, things like that. I had trusted her completely. I drove to an ATM that night and tried to check my balance. The account required a password I had never set up. Elise had managed the online access. I didn't have a card for it. I trusted her to handle it. I sat in that parking lot for a long time. I want to be very clear about something. I did not believe in that moment that my daughter had stolen from me. I could not make myself believe that. What I believed was that Victor had gotten into something, some deal, some scheme, and that Elise was caught between her husband and her father, and that she didn't know how to tell me the truth. That was what I believed because it was the version I could survive believing. I drove back to the house. Elise still wasn't home. I went to bed, and I did not sleep. She came home after midnight. I heard her in the kitchen, heard the refrigerator open, heard her footsteps stop outside my door. I lay there, in the dark, waiting to see if she would knock. She didn't. The next morning I found a note slipped under my door. It was written in Elise's handwriting on a piece of paper, torn from a yellow legal pad. The handwriting was small and cramped, like she'd been trying to fit too many words into too small a space. Dad, I need you to trust me right now, even though I know nothing about this makes sense. Please don't ask Victor any questions about the money. Please don't call your bank directly yet. I know you're scared, and I know you're angry, and you have every right to be both of those things. Please just trust me for 2 more weeks. I love you. Elise. I read that note 4 times. I folded it and put it in the front pocket of my jeans, and I wore those jeans for the next 2 weeks without washing them because I was afraid to lose it. I did what she asked. I don't fully know why, except that it was Elise's handwriting, the same handwriting that used to sign birthday cards to me in crayon, and I could feel, in the cramped little letters, something that was not betrayal. I couldn't name what it was. But it wasn't that. Victor, during those 2 weeks, became oddly warm toward me, almost friendly. He asked me about my teaching career. He asked if I'd thought more about Durham. He mentioned once, over dinner, that he'd been talking to a financial advisor about estate planning, and would I be interested in sitting down with them sometime. I said sure. He smiled. I watched him the way you watch a storm system on the weather map. Tracking. Waiting. On a Tuesday morning, 9 days after I'd found the note, Elise asked me to meet her at a Panera about 4 miles from the house. She said to come alone and not to tell Victor. I got there before her. I ordered a coffee I didn't drink. I watched the door. When she walked in, she looked like she hadn't slept properly in weeks. She sat down across from me, put her hands flat on the table, and said, "Dad, I need to tell you everything." It had started 11 months ago. Victor had gotten involved in a real estate deal that went wrong. Badly wrong. He'd put $80,000 of their own money into a private development fund that turned out to be, in his words, not entirely legitimate. He didn't use the word fraud. He said it carefully, the way people do when they're trying not to say a specific true thing. He needed money to cover the shortfall before his partners found out. He told Elise about the joint account. He told her it was a loan. He told her they would pay it back before I ever noticed. Elise had said no. She had said no clearly and completely, and Victor had responded by spending the next 3 months slowly convincing her that her father was a burden, that I was depressed and deteriorating, that a senior community would genuinely be better for me, that this way everyone won. He had a gift for that, for making the thing that was good for him sound like the thing that was good for everyone. When she finally understood what he was actually planning, not a loan, but a complete transfer of the account into a business entity he controlled, she panicked. She couldn't come to me directly. Victor monitored her phone. He had access to her email. He had spent months isolating her from her own friends, and she hadn't fully noticed until she tried to reach out and realized how small her world had gotten. So she made a plan. She contacted a family attorney named Harrington, who had done estate work for Carol and me years ago. She did it from a work phone she'd borrowed from a colleague. She told Harrington everything. Harrington connected her with a forensic accountant and, eventually, with the financial crimes unit of the NC Department of Justice. The process required her to appear for a few more weeks, completely compliant. If Victor suspected she was building a case, he would move the money and disappear it into whatever structure he'd set up. So she had to keep acting like things were proceeding as he planned, including asking me to leave. The envelope, the check, the senior community in Durham, all of it was theater. She was shaking when she told me that part. She said, "I've been watching your face for 2 weeks, Dad, and I've been dying inside." I reached across the table and took her hands. I didn't say anything right away. There wasn't anything to say right away. She said, "I hated every single second of it, having to stand there while he handed you that envelope. I was in the other room. I heard you put down your coffee cup. I thought about that Thursday afternoon. The low golden light, how peaceful the house looked. You should have told me," I said finally. "I know, I'm sorry. You shouldn't have had to do this alone." She was crying by then. "I know, I'm sorry, Dad." I squeezed her hands. "You have nothing to be sorry for." The following Thursday, Victor was arrested in the driveway of their home. I was not there for it. Elise had asked me to be somewhere else. She didn't want me to see his face when it happened. I was at Bert's house, sitting on his back porch with a cup of coffee that I actually drank, watching a pair of cardinals at his bird feeder, when my phone buzzed with a text from Elise that said simply, "It's done." Victor had been quietly moving money for the better part of a year. He'd managed to transfer $190,000 of the original $340,000 into an LLC he'd formed 6 months earlier. The forensic accountant had documented everything. The financial crimes unit had been building the case for 8 weeks. There was also a separate matter involving falsified documents in the original real estate deal. 2 other investors had been defrauded, and that case had been developing in parallel. He was charged with wire fraud, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, and 2 counts of securities fraud related to the original investment scheme. The account, what remained of it and what could be recovered, was frozen and then returned. It took several months, and Harrington worked harder than I had any right to expect, but in the end I got back $274,000. I lost $66,000. That hurt. I won't pretend it didn't hurt, but I got my daughter back. Elise filed for divorce 3 weeks after Victor's arrest. She moved into a small apartment in Chapel Hill, and I helped her carry boxes up 2 flights of stairs on a cold Saturday in November. We stopped for lunch at a diner nearby and split a piece of pie and talked about nothing important for an hour and a half, the way you can only do when the crisis is over and you're both still standing. I am back in Greensboro now. I found a small house to rent, a 2-bedroom with a backyard that needs work, on a street where the neighbors wave to each other. It's not Carol's house. Nothing will be Carol's house, but it's mine, and in the evenings I sit on the back porch with my coffee, and sometimes I think about all of it, the envelope, the sticky note, the note slipped under my door in cramped handwriting on a yellow legal pad, and I think about how close I came to losing both the money and my daughter at the same time. I think about all the people who do lose both. I know I'm lucky. I know not every story like mine ends with 2 people at a diner splitting a piece of pie. Some of them end with a man alone in a senior community in Durham, wondering what happened to his life. I started volunteering at a legal aid clinic in Greensboro last spring. It's a place that helps older adults who are dealing with financial exploitation, people whose families or caretakers have helped themselves to savings accounts, retirement funds, homes. The cases I hear there are not unusual. That is the part that never stops being hard to accept. None of these cases are unusual. There's a woman I met there, 71 years old, a retired nurse from Burlington. Her son and his girlfriend had taken $210,000 from her. She found out when her checking account bounced a $10 charge at the pharmacy. She sat across from me in that little clinic office, and she said, "I keep waiting to stop feeling stupid." And I said, "You weren't stupid. You were trusting someone you loved." And she said, "Is there a difference?" I thought about that for a long time after she left. I think there is a difference. I have to believe there is. Because love requires trust, and trust requires risk, and the fact that someone used that trust against you doesn't make the love a mistake. It makes them the mistake. Before you leave, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had someone protect you in a way you didn't understand until it was over? Drop a yes or no in the comments. I read every single one. A few months ago, Elise drove up from Chapel Hill on a Sunday, and we planted a small rose bush in the back corner of my yard. Carol used to grow roses at the old house. Deep red ones, the kind that come back every year whether you tend to them or not. Elise remembered. She showed up with a bare root rose wrapped in wet newspaper and a pair of gardening gloves. And she said, "I looked it up. This variety is supposed to be almost impossible to kill." We dug the hole together. It took longer than it should have because neither of us is particularly good at gardening, and we kept disagreeing about how deep it needed to be. She said 12 inches. I said 8. We compromised on 10. When we were done, we stood there looking at this small, unremarkable-looking stick of a plant poking out of the dirt, and Elise said, "Do you think it'll actually grow?" I said, "Your mother's always did." She took my hand. We stood there for a while. That's the thing about surviving something. It doesn't arrive as a grand moment. It doesn't announce itself. It's just a Sunday afternoon, and your daughter's hand in yours, and a rosebush that might grow or might not, and the quiet understanding that you are both still here. That's enough. Some days, that's everything. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you of your own family, your own close calls, the people who protected you when you didn't know you needed it, please subscribe to the channel. We're building a community here, and every one of you is why I keep telling these stories. I'll see you in the next one. I've been thinking a lot lately about the word trust. How casually we use it, how much weight it actually carries when you put it down in front of another person and walk away from it. I trusted Victor because he was my daughter's husband, and I was grieving, and it was easier to trust than to question. I trusted Elise with my finances because she was my child, and I had watched her grow from a little girl who signed birthday cards in crayon into a woman I believed was good. That trust was not naive. It was earned, over decades, through 1,000 small moments that added up to something real. What I've learned, and I mean learned the hard way, in a Walmart parking lot at night staring at an ATM screen, is that trust and vigilance are not opposites. I used to think they were. I used to think that if you truly trusted someone, you didn't check. That checking meant doubting, and doubting meant you didn't really trust them at all. That's wrong. Completely wrong. Trust is not the absence of attention. Trust is what you build through paying attention, consistently, over time. When I stopped paying attention, I didn't protect my trust. I just made it easier to exploit. Victor was patient. That's the thing I keep coming back to. He didn't grab and run. He spent months reshaping how Elise saw me, how she saw herself, how she understood what was reasonable and what wasn't. He made isolation feel like simplification. He made theft feel like estate planning. That kind of slow, deliberate manipulation doesn't announce itself. It arrives dressed as helpfulness, as practicality, as love. The only way to see it clearly is to stay connected, to your own instincts, to the people who knew you before, to the small voice that says something is wrong, even when everything looks fine. I almost didn't listen to that voice. I almost told myself I was being paranoid, that Victor was just difficult, that I should be grateful my daughter had taken me in at all. I had started to believe the story he was telling about me, that I was a burden, that I was deteriorating, that I needed to be managed. That is what sustained manipulation does. It doesn't just take your money, it takes your sense of yourself. Elise fought her way back to herself, and that required a kind of courage I don't have a clean word for. She was isolated, monitored, outmaneuvered at every turn, and she still found a way to protect both of us. She borrowed a phone. She called an old attorney. She held a plan together for weeks while watching her father's face and dying inside, as she put it. That is not luck, that is character, built over a lifetime of small choices about who you want to be when things get hard. What happens to people like Victor is not mysterious. When you build your life on taking from others, you are always one document, one phone call, one borrowed cell phone away from losing everything. The structure holds until it doesn't. And then it doesn't, completely, all at once. What happens to people like Elise is also not mysterious. When you spend years building integrity, Quiet, unsexy, day-to-day integrity. You have something to draw on when the moment comes that requires everything you have. She had it. It was there when she needed it. I think about the woman from Burlington I met at the legal aid clinic. The one who said she keeps waiting to stop feeling stupid. I want to tell her, I want to tell anyone who has been where we've been, that the capacity to love and trust deeply is not a weakness that was exploited. It is the best thing about you. The person who exploited it is the one who should carry the shame. Not you. That's what I know now. Took me 63 years in a parking lot at midnight and a note on a yellow legal pad to get there. But I know it.